right. Hey, everybody, this is Shane Rice here with Matt Nguyen and some other folks in marketing. And we're going to take a look at Google Trends. How does it work? How should where should it fall into your research process? Those kind of questions. And so with that, we'll just start with an intro to Google Trends. Matt and I didn't divide the agenda. So Matt, please chime in whenever you have something to add here. So just really quickly, Google Trends reports the popularity of terms. So if you go and look for just GitLab, it will show you how popular GitLab is over time. And then if you compare GitLab to say GitHub, I can't believe I just said GitLabs. I don't know what was going on in my brain when I did that, but it's not GitLabs. It's GitLab versus GitHub. And if you do that, what you'll see is how popular GitLab is compared to how popular GitHub is. At a very high level, that's how it works. The important thing to know is that the data is sampled. And so it's not Google reporting. I mean, and you think about how many Google searches happen, right? Like billions upon billions a day. So it's not like, they have the ability to just like pull out real-time data and give you a report on exactly how popular something is. They sample data. It goes all the way back to 2004. Well, so the way it works is you get I think it's 3 days. Is that right, Matt? Yeah, so they take a sample of the last 3 days, and then they take historical data that goes all the way back to 2004, and then they combine that into a chart that gives you that report. So depending on how far back you want to go as far as popularity, that's how much that plays into what you see visualized on the screen. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that the results are normalized. So like if I go and say how popular is Shane Rice in Google Trends, it's going to show 0 to 100, how popular is Shane at this different point of time. It's not showing me actually how many people are looking for Shane Rice. And there are a lot more Shane Rices in the world than you anticipate. One Shane Rice is an MMA fighter. Another one is a photographer in Mobile, Alabama, which is an hour ride away from me. So there's a lot of Shane Rices in the world, and we're not that popular. But when you look at just us, it says 0 to 100, and you get the sense how popular is Shane Rice, the term, over time. Yeah, and then Matt, you mentioned an example, apples versus Fuji apples. I want to let you cover that once you talk about that.
Yeah, the thing that is interesting is so I'll backtrack a little bit the use of Google Trends and the way I've used it in the past. I have an SEO paid search background, and so I use search data quite a bit. So Google Trends is a great tool to get a better understanding of really trends, how is a search term or how does a topic trend over time, right? And so the thing that Google Trends doesn't really, a lot of keyword data doesn't do for us is it doesn't take into account intent, right? So if we look at, actually, let me just show you, if I can get it to work. Hold on a second. I'll actually share my screen, probably best to share my screen. All right, can you see my Google Trends screen?
Yep,
so yeah, you can see the two between, so the last 12 months in the United States, apples, the popularity of apples is far above the popularity around Fuji apples, right? But the intent between the two fruits could be different of what you're trying to do. The other thing that it doesn't take into account, so better way to look at this is if you expand this out to 2004, right? So now you see trends over time. So you see this large spike that happens on a very frequent basis for the word apples. So say that you have an apple farm and you're trying to build content for your apple farm, right? And you look at this and you say, hey, you know what? During these times, people are really searching for apples. I should develop content about apples and not Fuji apples because it's such more popular. So then you go down that route. But then if you take a step further and understand what people are searching for around apples and using that concept of intent, there's actually a concept here where there's something totally unrelated that's causing this spike. So you type in Apple as a company, you'll realize that, look at that. The spikes that you see within Apple as a company follow the similar path of what we saw in the term apples. And so what that relates to is Apple's release of new products during that time. So you could be writing content for something that's totally unrelated. So Google Trends doesn't allow us to see that type of intent when we're looking at it. So that's something to be careful about when you're using that as deciding factors around content and keyword targeting. There's other attributes that I would look at and not just use Google Trends as a de facto data point. Does that make sense? If you have questions
thanks,
there.
Matt.
I take that as a no.
It was a great example. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we have in the agenda that follows up on this topic too is it's important to remember that what we're seeing there is popularity on Google, and we're not seeing how much traffic Google is actually sending out from itself for those terms, right? So let's take the Fuji apple example for a second and look at that. So if I search for Fuji apples right now, there's going to be, organic results, but there's also going to be just knowledge results that tell me like, what is a Fuji apple? And then you click on that and it keeps the searcher on that Google search result page. So there's not a guarantee that just because you target, that Fuji apple term, that you're going to get traffic from that, even if you rank on the first page, because you may, see that people are just looking for a very transactional information about, what is a Fuji apple? Like, how did it originate? Or, like whatever kind of, really kind of quick answer Google can provide. A lot of times they're providing that within Google now. So popularity does not also, as much as it doesn't equal intent, it also does not equal traffic if you rank for that. And so that's one of the things we have to consider when we look at, popularity over time. So I think, Matt covered this a little bit in the research phase, but we, generally use Google Trends to determine general changes between terms. So, this came up recently when we were looking at webinar versus webcast, right? How popular are those two versus each other when you look in Google Trends? And, we can see that webinar is more popular. And so now we want to take that a step further and say, okay, so how do we set keyword strategy and include that trends data to say, this popular term, and let's step back from that specific example, this popular term, how can we build research around this to generate traffic back to GitLab? And so to do that, we use tools that give us an estimate of how much traffic is available for a term. And so for us, we use SEMrush. We've used Moz.com in the past. And basically what these tools do is they go out and assemble like their own data sets around volume, so that you're not just getting like a measure of popularity, you're actually getting a measure of how many times people search for this in a month. And I mean, look, they're estimates. They're not like, like rock solid numbers. You just have to look at that and say, okay, so based on this, I can see that this is going to get, from 10 to 100 searches a month. Okay, well, how valuable are those 10 to 100 searches to us? That's what we stop and look at, because we have to have volume. We have to capture as much as we can on, like top level keywords. But when you really start getting further into those intentional keywords, that's where we see a lot of value from the organic perspective for GitLab specifically. So we've kind of front loaded this with a run through on Google Trends. What questions do y'all have?
I entered an example of searches on the term GitLab versus the term Bitbucket over 10 years and worldwide, and dropped that in the notes. And I can even share a screen just so people can see what exactly I'm referring to.
Yeah, that'd be great, Brian. Thanks.
So there's that, and you can kind of see, because I hear a lot of people using examples from Google Trends, whether it's in a competitive analysis like this or to validate how much people are talking about something or another. And I don't know if how much people are searching for a thing equates to how much people are talking about a thing, but I wanted to hear your perspective on, the data that are here and what interpretation you would take away from something like this.
Matt, do you want to take a first run at that?
Sure. I mean, looking at this, I mean, you can quickly say that people are searching at this time point, something happened, and people started searching for GitLab more frequently, or had more interest in that. So I always like, in all my keyword research and trying to decide for paid or for SEO, like asking the why question, like, well, why did that happen? Is it just because GitLab became more popular? Was there more PR? What PR was that? So getting a better understanding of that. So with that, it helps us bucket what those searches are for based off intent. Was it information around our funding? Was it information around a topic that came up on forums? Is it actually about our product? So getting into the granular of not just GitLab as a whole is going to be super important to understand where the trend separates. So that's where I would take a look at this first. And the same thing with Bitbucket. Like you can see, like they were increasing over time, and then for some reason they flattened out and are on a semi downward trend. Is it because they're being talked about less in the news? Are they being overshadowed by GitLab? Not to say those are defining attributes, but I always like looking at using this and saying like, huh, this is interesting data. What's the why behind it? What backing information that can I go and research and then become actionable about? I wouldn't take this and be 100% actionable just because of this separation.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, you can take this a step back and look at like Git, you can look at GitHub, and those trends completely change, right? So
Relative.
I think, what were you saying, Brian? I'm sorry.
Because it's relative, right? Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's the normalization.
Yeah, and so I mean, relative to each other, I think this is like Matt's saying, like very interesting to see, but it's a starting point and not a conclusion, right? It's we can look at this and we can look for trends to identify. Like I bet if we look at that one spike you see for GitLab, I would almost guarantee you that's probably a month where that's the GitHub acquisition, right? Like that's when everything spikes there. And we had a campaign that was related specifically to that. Other spikes are probably, that September 2019, that's funding, right? There's always, like you can, if you know the company well enough, you can see where those spikes are coming from and see, what actions we may have taken that led to that. So that's great.
Cool.
Cool. So, Dara, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just doing sort of a follow-on to what Brian was showing there, kind of that interesting how things have differed in different countries. Are we doing anything different for us regionally to focus our efforts? I feel like PMG might be. I'm not sure overall what our approach has been.
So I would say from an organic side of things, right now we've just focused on global terms. We haven't looked at regional specifications yet. One of the things with the localization project that's coming up, we're going to be, considering, local terms, local, spellings when it comes to like, English speaking countries, things like that. But we haven't looked at trends specifically or done a lot of research around, those topics at this point from organic side. Matt, do you have anything from like the paid side to speak to on that?
Yeah, on the paid side, with what we do with PMG, we've tested a few things around translation. I don't think we have a clear answer to how translations are performing, just because the site doesn't fully support that, right? So if I'm on a landing page in French, and I click off, now it's in English, and so you don't really get a clean data set of like if that's impacting. But we have the ability to try to test that and figure out high level what translation does. I just don't think our site as a whole supports that. So we focus more on like English global terms.
It makes sense. I'm just seeing more requests sort of from sales leaders specifically. So in go-to-market, aspect of how can we drill down to know, segments as well as regions, and wanting us to be a little bit more defined in what we do. So just, it may be something that's coming, but I was curious what we were doing already. So thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I think the one thing I'll add kind of like to the whole intent idea again is to understand like the intent of this, to understand the searcher and then what you're using as far as your trends inputs, right? And so I'll use the example of webinar and webcast. I know there's like a little bit of a conversation around like what we should use, but if you take a step back and look at who's searching, is somebody going to say, hey, because this is a webcast, I'm not going to watch it, but if there's a webinar, I will watch it, right? I don't think people are making that decision. They're more interested in the content in itself versus the term like webcast or webinar. So when we do keyword research, when we look at trends data, we have to take a step back and understand, like, is this going to make a deciding factor for an individual? If yes, then let's move towards that direction. But if it's no, then is it really worth the effort into doing this huge project into changing things when the intent of the person is more of the contextual aspect of the site or the content versus a specific word, if that makes sense.
And if somebody was looking for a GitLab webinar, would they find the webcast, right?
Right.
Would be the key thing.
Right, 100%. And then there's things like I wouldn't take that and say, hey, let's not approach that project. There's things that we can do within GitLab to test that. Like I would look at from the paid side. If we're looking at click through, we can easily A/B test webinar versus webcast and then figure out if that's what we should be with or not. But yeah, I always try to tread lightly with very general terms like that and get back to the understanding of like, okay, what is the person actually trying to do?
I thought I'd share real quick on that note, because I've occasionally used this, that you can filter just with YouTube search versus all forms of search combined. So if you are specifically trying to market a video or decide how to title a video on YouTube for findability there, you may find, as in this example with DevOps and Agile, they're much closer to each other on YouTube search than they are in search in general. So if you're just trying to figure out how to position or how to title something, you might actually want to drill down if you're specifically creating a video for YouTube and just look at the YouTube search filter.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I was going to ask, since we have a few minutes, if y'all are open to it, if you have a way that you use Google Trends or that you look at it, I'd really, I think it'd be great to hear about it and record it for this video. Anybody else have an example from Google Trends? All right. Well, I guess we'll get 4 minutes back. Y'all, I appreciate you coming and asking your questions. I think it really improved what we were able to talk about today. And so if you have any other questions, please reach out to us. You can hit us up in marketing, the Slack channel.
I do have one question.
Yes.
Sorry to ruin your outro.
No, it's fine. It's not ruined at all.
Is there ever a time when you'd pick something less popular so you can like own that space more?
100%. I think that goes back to like the intent. I keep going back to intent because I find it's very important. Like using the term like going back to the example with apples and whatever else, right? That farmer always has a better intent of a person if they target a very specific term for their farm versus just Apple, because there's so much noise around Apple as a company, Apple products in itself, what people are doing. So it actually behooves you to do stuff that's less popular because it matches what you're trying to get to as far as like a goal for your content.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think in our context, there's definitely like things that we can see where we already do that. For example, so like security is like a really popular term. And we use security as a term, but most of the time what we're really targeting is DevSecOps or even, longer tail keywords based off of that root keyword. And so, it's really, what is aligning with your target audience needs is what you think about there. And so, you know, because our target audience for security, they absolutely think about and talk about security. They probably, you know, use security in their job title somewhere. But when it comes to like the practice that, you know, we cover for them, it's, you know, we've got to go deeper into that so that we match, you know, that intent with what our product offers and how it can help those individual contributors. So yeah, so I definitely on board with Matt with this. You know, we want to start with the Google trend and then move that into the research phase of like, you know, what lines up with what we're trying to accomplish from a business perspective. All right, cool. Well, I already did the outro, so we get some time back.
Do we have any trends or words that are just like they auto MQL? Sorry, I'm being John Coughlin right now. I don't know if any of you are ever on meetings with John. He's great, but he's always that person. Do we have any terms that you're just like, this person is searching for something so specific that it's like buy now that we would auto like MQL them, or just, you know, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of our branded searches are going to fall into that category. So like somebody looks for GitLab trial, boom, auto MQL, get them to the free trial page. You know, that's just the one that pops up to the top of my head, but there are, you know, there are probably a lot of others, probably even some that are not branded. Matt, do you have any that come to the top of your mind from the paid side?
Yeah, primarily like what you mentioned is the branded stuff. So if anybody searches for, I mean, that's a big one we're targeting right now is GitLab trials, because that's a very specific thing that people are looking for. Also GitLab demo is another one. That's, I want to learn more about the GitLab product in itself. So anything product related, contact sales, contact and contact sales, or contact itself is very different because it's contact, I need help, I don't know why this isn't working, and there's contact sales for business, so you're gonna have to be careful there too. But so there's not, to answer that better question, there's not terms that you auto MQL, obviously, it's like the person does once you land that person on that page. So I just wanted to find those two things.
Yeah, because the MQL doesn't happen
Mhm.
until they actually click the trial button, but you've dropped them on the right page. So
Yeah. And even then, you know, like, so some of the targets Matt has for paid ads, you can do like, you know, broad match. So you can say like, you know, okay, so if it's generally includes GitLab trial, right? Like he might do that. Whereas, you know, like for the contact one, you're probably doing an exact match on that to say like, you know, I only want it when it says contact sales, you know? So there's definitely, you know, matching up the intent with the exact phrase when it comes to some of the targeting.
Got it. Thank you. I promise that's it. You can do your real outro now.
No, it's great. I love it. The outro is done, so we'll end the call. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.